You've heard the stories about Richard Feynman, the bongo drums, the Nobel Prize, the brilliant physicist who could explain almost anything in plain language. He's remembered as the fun genius, the charming one, the guy who made hard ideas feel simple. But there's one idea Feynman had that almost nobody talks about. Not because it's complicated, not because it's technical, but because it's dangerous. Because once you really understand it, it quietly changes how you see experts, authority, and even your own confidence and what you think you know. Here's the idea, stated as simply as possible. Most people don't really understand what they claim to know. Not deeply, not fundamentally, including experts. That sounds harsh, but it isn't an insult. It's an observation. Feynman spent most of his life surrounded by experts, physicists, professors, committees filled with people whose credentials filled entire pages. On the surface, everything looked normal. They spoke confidently. They used precise technical language. They referenced equations, papers, and accepted theories. Everyone nodded along. This is what expertise is supposed to look like. But Feynman noticed something strange, something unsettling. Very often, no one actually understood what was being discussed, not at a fundamental level. What he saw wasn't understanding, it was performance. Here's how the performance works. Experts use specialized language. That language creates a barrier. On one side, the people who know, on the other, everyone else. And crossing that barrier feels risky, because asking simple questions makes you look ignorant. So most people don't ask. They assume that if something sounds complicated, it must be deep. If someone sounds confident, they must understand, and the performance continues. Feynman didn't accept that. He would interrupt meetings with questions that felt almost childish. What does that actually mean? How does that work, really? Can you explain it without the equations? And suddenly something interesting would happen. The expert would hesitate, then retreat, more jargon, more abstraction, more references to authority. Anything except a clear explanation. And here's the truly uncomfortable part. When one expert couldn't explain it, no one else in the room could either. They had all been nodding along, assuming everyone else understood. One simple question was enough to expose the illusion. Feynman saw this pattern again and again. In physics, in education, in government. People weren't lying. They genuinely believed they understood because they could participate in the conversation. They knew the right words. They knew the accepted formulas. They knew how to sound correct. But sounding correct is not the same as understanding. This led Feynman to a simple but ruthless rule. If you can't explain something in simple language, you don't really understand it. Not dumbing it down, not removing complexity. Explaining the core idea clearly. Because real understanding has a strange property. At its center, it's simple. The details may be complex, but the foundation is clear. If that foundation isn't clear, there is no understanding, only memorization. Now stop and think about how dangerous this idea is. How many things do you believe you understand because you know the right terminology? How many experts have you trusted because they sounded confident? How often have you nodded along, afraid to ask a simple question? Feynman realized something most people never confront. Our systems reward the appearance of knowledge, not knowledge itself. This is why the system doesn't collapse, because deep understanding isn't required most of the time. A physicist can apply equations without understanding their meaning. A doctor can follow protocols without understanding the deepest biology. A consultant can use frameworks without knowing why they work. Things still function. Planes still fly. Medicine still helps people. Technology still advances. But that doesn't mean the understanding is there. It means the system survives on habits, rules, and repetition, like a pencil balanced perfectly on its tip, stable until someone pushes. Feynman pushed, and when he did, the system wobbled. The expert who couldn't justify their own model, the committee that couldn't explain its decisions, the textbook that hid confusion behind elegant language. Once you start seeing this, you see it everywhere, in business, in politics, in self-help, in social media, thought leaders. Complexity used not to explain, but to intimidate. This doesn't mean all experts are fake. That's not the lesson. The lesson is more subtle and more uncomfortable. Credentials don't guarantee understanding. Confidence doesn't prove knowledge. And complexity doesn't equal depth. Only clarity does. Feynman's most dangerous idea isn't a scientific theory. It's a moral stance, intellectual honesty, the willingness to say, I don't know, the courage to ask simple questions, the refusal to be impressed by complexity when simplicity should be possible. Once you adopt that mindset, you can't unsee the performance. And that's why this idea isn't popular, because it makes everyone uncomfortable, especially experts. So here's the real question. The next time someone gives you a complicated answer, will you assume the problem is your intelligence, or will you ask them to explain it simply? Because that one question, asked honestly, is more dangerous than it looks.